For decades, the idea of a Gulf Arab state making direct, highly publicized infrastructure investments in Jammu and Kashmir was, well, was practically unthinkable.
Oh, absolutely. It would have been considered diplomatic heresy.
Right. The historical, ideological, and, the religious fault lines of the region dictated that such a move just couldn't happen. Yet recently, Dubai proposed exactly that.
Yeah, which is huge.
So what changed? I mean, how did we get from decades of rigid diplomatic gridlock to Emirati capital pouring into one of the most geopolitically complex regions in South Asia, right alongside cutting-edge Israeli agricultural technology?
The answer lies in a geopolitical earthquake called the I2U2.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we are taking a massive, comprehensive look at the formation, the strategic logic, and the sprawling geopolitical implications of the I2U2 grouping. So that is India, Israel, the UAE, and the United States.
Right. And if you follow international relations, you will often see this referred to as the West Asian Quad. And our mission for this deep dive is to build a high-retention, exam-ready framework for you. We are going to master the geopolitical, economic, and security linkages of the I2U2.
But we aren't just going to list off facts, right?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
We're going to break down the international relations theory into actionable frameworks, tracing the exact cause and effect chains that led to its creation. We need to look at the strategic policy shift this represents for all the stakeholders.
Specifically focusing on how India has, completely reimagined its foreign policy playbook in the Middle East.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. To truly understand why the I2U2 is such a massive paradigm shift, we really have to establish the baseline first. We have to look at what the Middle East looked like before 2020.
Right, the pre-2020 landscape.
Yeah. For decades, the primary geopolitical reality in this region was a stark, almost immovable historical divide. Specifically, the Arab nations and Israel were deeply, fundamentally divided over the Palestine issue. And for a country like India, this presented a massive strategic headache.
It was the ultimate diplomatic tightrope. I mean, India has always had vital yet distinct national interests with both the Arab world and with Israel.
But because of that historical divide, simultaneous, open, multilateral cooperation was effectively considered impossible.
Right. If India wanted to secure its energy needs and protect its massive diaspora with the Arab states,
Yeah.
it had to do so in one room.
Yeah, and then if it wanted to acquire critical defense technology and agricultural innovations from Israel, it had to do so in a completely different room, right? Like behind closed doors.
Precisely. Foreign policy had to be conducted in completely separate, isolated silos. The geopolitical calculus was largely viewed as a zero-sum game in the public sphere.
So you have this rigid architecture, but then we get a trigger event that completely shatters that status quo. This is where we need to look at September 2020 and the signing of the Abraham Accords.
A massive turning point.
Yeah. These accords were brokered by the United States, and they fundamentally rewired the diplomatic architecture of the Middle East.
They absolutely did. The Abraham Accords led to the formal normalization of relations between Israel and several Arab Gulf countries. Now, for your strategic framework, you need to lock in the specific facts of this trigger event.
What are the key facts they need to remember?
The United Arab Emirates became the third Arab country to formally normalize its relationship with Israel. Before the UAE, the only other Arab nations to take this step were Egypt back in 1979 and Jordan in 1994.
And it's crucial to understand the geography here, too. The UAE wasn't just the third Arab country. They became the very first Persian Gulf country to take this massive step.
Right, the geography is key.
And Bahrain also signed onto the accords shortly after. But, diplomacy is always a transaction, right? What was the concurrent variable that made this palatable for the Arab states?
Well, as a crucial part of this diplomatic maneuvering, Israel agreed to suspend its plans for annexing parts of the West Bank.
Got it. So that was the political cover, basically, the diplomatic concession that allowed the UAE and Bahrain to formalize this relationship.
Precisely. But here's the nuance you must capture. These accords formalized what had long been robust yet strictly informal foreign relations between these nations.
Wait, really? So they were already working together?
Oh, absolutely. Beneath the surface of public hostility, there was already an underlying economic and security pragmatism developing. Israel and the Gulf states were quietly sharing intelligence regarding mutual regional concerns, primarily surrounding Iran, and exploring covert economic ties.
Ah, okay. So the Abraham Accords didn't just, create the relationship out of thin air. They brought it into the formal diplomatic light.
Exactly. And this brings us to the root causes and the genesis of the I2U2 itself. Because the question is, how does India fit into this Arab-Israeli thaw?
Right, this is where we look at the conceptual groundwork. The idea of an Indo-Abrahamic Accord was first articulated by Muhammad Solomon, an Egyptian scholar based in Washington. His core thesis focused squarely on India's unique position.
Right. Solomon observed that because India already had deep, trusted, but separate relationships with both the UAE and Israel, New Delhi was perfectly positioned to take full advantage of this newly public Arab-Israeli normalization.
I like to think of it strategically like a geopolitical startup ecosystem,
Yeah.
or maybe more simply, like two key partners in a broader regional network who have had a historical, formalized falling out.
That's a good way to frame it.
Right. Because even if they occasionally collaborated behind closed doors on specific projects, they couldn't be seen together in public. But when they finally formally reconcile and sign a treaty, it instantly allows a third partner, in this case India, to openly and aggressively collaborate with both of them simultaneously.
It entirely removes the diplomatic awkwardness, yeah.
Exactly. It removes the need for parallel, secretive, bilateral tracks.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this shift represented a massive new opening for India's strategic cooperation in the region, particularly alongside the United States.
Because historically, India's engagement in the Middle East was incredibly cautious, right?
Very cautious. It was defined by a strict policy of non-alignment, constantly balancing various regional fault lines, Arab versus Israeli, Saudi versus Iranian. The Abraham Accords provided the exact geopolitical cover required for India to take its established bilateral relationships and interlock them into a singular multilateral regional strategy.
Okay, let's make sure we are anchoring this timeline for everyone. If you are building a mental timeline, quick check, which two Arab countries normalized relations with Israel before the UAE and in what exact years?
Take a second to mentally place them.
You should be thinking of Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994. Recognizing that massive multi-decade gap between 1994 and the UAE in 2020 really highlights just how stagnant Middle Eastern diplomacy had become.
Yeah, and why the Abraham Accords were such a seismic trigger event. Having that chronological timeline memorized demonstrates a structural understanding of Middle Eastern diplomacy.
Right. So let's consolidate this background into a structured, highly retentive format.
Yes, if you're trying to wrap your head around this for an exam, or just to really understand the news, we need to build a mental cheat sheet. Here is a 150-word synthesis framework on the genesis of the I2U2 grouping.
Okay, let's build this framework. I've got my pen ready. What are the absolute non-negotiable anchor points?
Okay, so your heading is the genesis of the I2U2. Your first bullet point is pre-2020 informal ties.
Pre-2020 informal ties.
Got it. You must note that robust but informal economic and security relations already existed beneath the surface of the Arab-Israeli divide. Bullet 2 is the trigger event, the 2020 Abraham Accords, and explicitly note that these were U.S. brokered.
Okay, 2020 Abraham Accords, U.S. brokered.
Bullet 3 covers the normalization itself. You need to state that the UAE and Bahrain normalized relations with Israel, highlighting the UAE's unique position as the first Persian Gulf nation to do so.
Right, the first Persian Gulf nation. That distinction is key.
Exactly. Bullet 4 is the diplomatic concession. Note the freezing of Israel's West Bank annexation plans as the concurrent variable that facilitated the accords.
The political cover.
Yes. And your final bullet is strategic conceptualization. Here, you cite the origin of the Indo-Abrahamic Accord concept, outlining how India was uniquely positioned to leverage this newfound normalization.
Okay, so pre-2020 ties, trigger event, normalization, diplomatic concession, and strategic conceptualization. What are the key terms we need to underline here?
The key vocabulary terms you want to underline in your mind or on your paper are the Abraham Accords, the Indo-Abrahamic Accord, and diplomatic pragmatism.
Perfect. That gives us the why and the how of its origins. Now let's transition into the actual mechanics. If India is redefining its diplomatic ties, how does that actually hit the ground?
Right, the practical application.
Yeah. Where is the money flowing,
Right.
and how is this grouping structure? That brings us to the stakeholders, the objectives, and India's strategic policy shift.
Let's examine the institutional formation details first. This grouping did not emerge overnight as a fully formed alliance. It officially began much more modestly as a quadrilateral economic forum in October 2021.
Okay, so October 2021 was the start.
Yes. The institutionalization of the group peaked several months later with the first Virtual Leaders Summit, which was held on July 14, 2022. That date is a critical milestone.
July 14th, 2022. And what's fascinating here is the strategic motivation underlying this grouping. It is based on a very precise, highly complementary formula.
It really is.
This isn't just four random countries deciding to talk. It's a perfectly balanced equation where each stakeholder brings a specific vital component to the table. Let's use that geopolitical startup analogy again.
It is a highly effective analogy. You must understand the exact formula of strategic inputs.
Yeah.
The I2U2 formula is India's massive market scale and human capital, combined with Israeli technological innovation, fueled by Emirati financial capital, and backed by United States strategic and diplomatic support.
Okay, so if we look at it like a venture, the UAE is the venture capital, providing immense sovereign wealth funding.
Yes.
Israel is the elite R&D department, bringing cutting-edge tech in areas where resources are scarce. India is both the massive consumer market and the manufacturing and human capital engine.
Yes, exactly.
And the United States acts as the powerful board of directors, basically, providing the overarching diplomatic top cover and strategic muscle that gives the whole enterprise global credibility.
That's exactly how it functions. And the institutional dimensions of this startup are strictly defined. To ensure continuity and prevent the initiative from stalling between major summits, the four nations rely on regular Sherpa-level interactions.
Let's define that really quickly. A Sherpa in international diplomacy is the personal representative of a head of state who prepares the ground for major summits, right?
Correct. Furthermore, the focus of these interactions is deliberately restricted to 6 non-security areas. You need to commit these 6 pillars to memory.
Okay, what are they?
They are food security, health, water, space, transportation, and energy.
I want to pause on those 6 pillars: food security, health, water, space, transportation, and energy. Notice what is glaringly absent from that list.
The security aspect.
Exactly. There are no overt military exercises, no mutual defense pacts, no joint weapons development listed in those primary pillars.
That absence is entirely deliberate, and we will explore why when we compare this grouping to others. But first, we must examine the core of this entire topic, India's paradigm shift.
Right.
The formation of the I2U2 represents 4 major structural policy decisions by New Delhi. You must understand how these 4 shifts completely rewire India's historical posture.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the first shift?
The first shift is creating a ministerial in the Middle East. For the first time, India is moving away from conducting bilateral relations in those separate, isolated silos we discussed earlier. It's actively transitioning toward an integrated regional policy.
An integrated regional policy.
Yeah.
Got it. And the second?
The second shift is bridging the Arab-Israeli rift.
Yeah.
India has moved toward non-ideological engagement. This is the very definition of diplomatic pragmatism.
So they aren't picking sides based on historical grievances anymore.
Exactly. India is proving, on the world stage, that simultaneous deep cooperation with both the Arab world and Israel is not just a theoretical concept, but a highly feasible working reality.
Wait, I have to push back here. For decades, stretching all the way back to the Cold War and the non-aligned movement, India essentially defined the West, and specifically the United States, as part of the problem in the Middle East.
That is historically accurate, yes.
I mean, American intervention was often viewed with deep suspicion in New Delhi. So does this formal grouping mean India is abandoning its historical ideological stances to just join an exclusive Western-aligned club in the region?
It's a vital question, but
Oh, yeah.
you must understand that this is not an exclusive relationship, nor is it an abandonment of India's strategic autonomy. It is instead a masterclass in diplomatic pragmatism.
Okay, how so?
By breaking the historical political taboo of openly aligning with both sides, India is demonstrating the feasibility of non-ideological engagement based purely on mutual national interests. Which brings us directly to the third major policy decision, extending U.S. cooperation.
Meaning they're bringing the U.S. in, rather than keeping them at arm's length.
Yes. India is fundamentally reimagining the United States as a strategic partner in the Middle East. Instead of viewing the U.S. purely through the old lens of historical non-alignment, where the U.S. was seen as an interfering or destabilizing entity, India now recognizes that U.S. diplomatic architecture is necessary to facilitate these massive regional economic corridors.
So they need American diplomatic weight to make the economics work.
Exactly. And the fourth decision is the embrace of new regionalism. Just as we see India doing in the Indo-Pacific, Regional coalitions are being actively utilized to widen Delhi's reach and deepen its strategic economic footprint.
Let's ensure we are connecting the sequence here, tracing the cause-effect chain from high-level diplomacy down to actual trade.
It's a direct chain, yes.
It begins with geopolitics, specifically reimagining U.S., Arab, and Israeli relations through the U.S.-brokered Abraham Accords. That geopolitical shift creates a massive opening for the economy, allowing the combination of Emirati venture capital, Israeli R&D innovation, and Indian market scale.
Yeah.
And that economic integration ultimately reinforces security, because when you build regional economic stability and deep interdependence, you secure critical trade routes and domestic supply chains. The three are inextricably linked.
That sequence is the absolute core logic of the grouping. Let's do a quick mental check before we move to the specific impacts on India.
Okay, listener, time to test your active recall.
Recall the precise date of that first Leaders Summit. It was July 14th, 2022. And more importantly, you must instantly recall the exact combination of the four nations' strategic inputs.
Indian scale and human capital, Israeli technological innovation, Emirati financial capital, and U.S. strategic support.
Perfect. If you cannot produce those specific inputs on demand, you do not fully grasp the fundamental logic, the why of the grouping.
So what does this all mean for India domestically? I mean, how does this high-level four-nation diplomacy actually impact the average Indian citizen or the broader Indian economy?
It's a huge domestic impact. Yeah.
This brings us to the actual impact on India, specifically looking at the economic and security implications. The economic implications are massive, deeply interconnected, and multifaceted. Let's start with energy security.
Essential for India.
Right. India is a rapidly growing massive economy, and it depends heavily on energy imports from the Persian Gulf to keep the lights on and factories running. Any regional architecture that stabilizes this zone directly serves India's core national interest by ensuring a predictable, stable energy basket.
And the second major economic implication is the diaspora and remittances. There are nearly 9 million Indian workers currently living in the Persian Gulf.
9 million. That is a massive number of people.
It is. Think about the massive flow of remittances coming from the UAE back to states like Kerala. The economic output, the safety, and the livelihoods of those 9 million citizens are directly tied to the regional stability that the I2U2 aims to foster.
And the third major economic implication is infrastructure financing. The UAE possesses vast sovereign wealth funds, and it provides India with crucial, much-needed capital for massive infrastructure development.
Which is where things really shift.
Right. And as you mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive, this is not theoretical. It is explicitly evidenced by the unprecedented proposals from Dubai to invest directly in infrastructure projects in Jammu and Kashmir. Here's where it gets really interesting.
It really is.
Dubai proposing investment in Jammu and Kashmir is a massive geopolitical and economic signal. We literally cannot overstate this. For decades, a Gulf Arab state investing in that specific region would have triggered immense diplomatic backlash due to the religious and geopolitical sensitivities involving Pakistan and the broader Islamic world.
Oh, massive backlash.
The fact that the UAE is willing to bypass those historical ideological fault lines to make direct infrastructure investments in J&K demonstrates a staggering shift. It shows that hard economic imperatives, supply chain realities, and pure diplomatic pragmatism are now superseding the old ideological and religious barriers that previously defined the region.
Exactly. It signals to the world that India has successfully de-hyphenated its relationships in the region, and that economic pragmatism flows directly into the security and tech implications for India.
Okay, let's break down the security and tech side.
We must look at three specific areas here. First, military acquisitions. Israel is already a major arms supplier to India, providing critical drone technology, missile defense systems, and border security tech. Israel is a vital, irreplaceable player in India's ongoing defense modernization plan.
Okay, so Israeli defense tech is pillar one of the security implications. What's the second?
Second is agri-tech and water management. India faces severe groundwater depletion and massive agricultural challenges. Israeli cutting-edge agricultural technology, specifically in areas like drip irrigation and advanced desalination, is absolutely crucial for India's domestic water management and long-term food security.
This is where the I2U2 really shines, isn't it? Emirati capital funding Israeli desalination plants built on Indian soil to secure the food supply that will eventually be exported back to the Gulf. It's a perfect loop.
That loop is brilliant. It perfectly illustrates how those 6 pillars, food, water, energy, interact.
And what about the higher-end tech? Because we hear a lot about that.
That is the third area: technology cooperation. There is immense joint collaboration potential in frontier technologies. We are talking about semiconductor design and fabrication, as well as advanced space technology.
Space and semiconductors.
Yes. When you look at Dubai's massive capital investments and Israel's willingness to engage in high-level tech transfers, you must link this directly to India's domestic policy of Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliance.
This is a crucial translation point. When we talk about overcoming technology dependence, we are really talking about vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. Strategic vulnerabilities.
Right, because India has incredible human capital in semiconductor design, thousands of engineers designing the chips. But fabrication, actually building the physical microchips, requires tens of billions of dollars in capital and highly advanced proprietary technology.
Which is hard to acquire alone.
Exactly. So by securing semiconductor design pathways and tech transfers through the I2U2 framework utilizing U.S. and Israeli tech and UAE funding, India is aggressively addressing its own critical domestic security and technology dependence vulnerabilities. It's using foreign policy to fix domestic supply chain weaknesses.
That is the ultimate goal of geoeconomics. Let us codify this immense domestic impact into a structured framework. If you are asked to analyze the significance of this grouping, here is a highly effective 250-word intro-body conclusion structure on I2U2's significance for India's national interest.
All right, let's build the ultimate cheat sheet for India's domestic stakes. How to structure this 250-word answer?
In your introduction, you must explicitly define the I2U2 grouping as a manifestation of India's structural shift toward an integrated regional policy in West Asia. Clearly state that New Delhi has transitioned away from its historical reliance on isolated bilateral silos.
Got it. Integrated regional policy, no more isolated silos. What about the body?
For the body paragraphs, you categorize the impacts into 4 distinct bullet points. Point 1 is energy and the diaspora. You must cite India's heavy reliance on the Persian Gulf for its energy basket, and explicitly mention the 9 million Indian diaspora workers ensuring vital remittance flows.
Okay, energy basket and the 9 million diaspora workers.
Point 2 is defense modernization. Highlight Israel's established role as a primary arms supplier and a key technological partner for India's critical military upgrades.
Defense modernization via Israel. Got it.
Point 3 focuses on geoeconomics and infrastructure. Detail the influx of UAE sovereign capital, specifically utilizing the Dubai investment proposal in Jammu and Kashmir as your primary, undeniable evidence of shifting geopolitical realities.
Right, Dubai and J&K is the perfect example to use there.
And point 4 covers advanced technology. Lists semiconductor design, space exploration, and advanced water management as the critical vectors through which India is actively overcoming its technology dependence.
Advanced tech, semiconductors, space, water. And how do we wrap it up?
In your conclusion, summarize the entire argument by noting how the I2U2 provides India with strategic depth. It successfully bridges Western and Middle Eastern interests through diplomatic pragmatism, all without sacrificing India's core strategic autonomy.
Strategic depth and diplomatic pragmatism without losing strategic autonomy. What are the key terms to underline here?
The critical administrative terminology you should embed in your understanding here includes energy basket, defense modernization, infrastructure financing, technology cooperation, and Atmanirbhar Bharat.
That perfectly encapsulates the domestic impact. But, no country operates in a vacuum. We need to zoom out and look at the broader global chessboard. Geopolitically, the I2U2 is entirely unique. It is currently India's only new multilateral coalition in the Middle East. It provides a massive thrust to this concept of new regionalism and actively opens doors to what strategists call an extended neighborhood.
Yes, the concept of the extended neighborhood is vital. The I2U2 isn't designed to be a closed loop. It creates diplomatic and economic pathways to eventually bring in common regional partners.
Like who?
For example, nations like Egypt or Saudi Arabia could eventually interface with this architecture, which would lend even greater strategic depth and market scale to these Indo-Abrahamic linkages.
Now, because the I2U2 is colloquially referred to as the West Asian Quad, it is inevitably compared to the original Indo-Pacific Quad, the grouping of India, the US, Japan, and Australia. But assuming these two quads serve the same purpose is a massive analytical trap, isn't it?
It is the most common mistake made when analyzing this topic. You must understand the distinct, fundamental differences between the two quads. We can break these differences down into 3 distinct areas: the China factor, the format, and the focus.
Okay, let's start with the big one, the China factor.
First, and most importantly, the China factor. The Indo-Pacific Quad is heavily defined by its posture regarding a rising, assertive China in maritime spaces. The I2U2, however, is emphatically not anti-China.
Really? Not at all.
No. Countering China is a massive long shot in this Middle Eastern context. Why? Because China already possesses deeply strengthening commercial, technological, and infrastructure ties with both the UAE and Israel. The UAE hosts massive Chinese infrastructure, and Israel has significant Chinese investment in its tech sector. The I2U2 cannot force its members to decouple from Beijing.
That makes sense. The UAE isn't going to suddenly rip up its trade agreements with China just because it's sitting at a table with the US and India.
Exactly.
So if the target isn't China, what about the format?
That is the second difference, the format. The Indo-Pacific Quad has a heavily strategic, security-oriented subtext, focusing on maritime domain awareness and a free and open Indo-Pacific. The I2U2 lacks that formal, unified security consensus. It is a loose grouping. It is fundamentally, essentially, an economic forum, not a strategic military alliance.
Okay, an economic forum, not a military alliance. And the third bit.
That leads to the third difference, the focus. The Indo-Pacific Quad has a unifying, galvanizing motive based on a shared perceived threat. The I2U2 lacks that entirely. It is not aimed at any particular country, nor is it aimed at countering any specific ideology.
So what does this all mean? If this new West Asian Quad lacks a strong shared security purpose, lacks a formal military consensus mechanism, and isn't aimed at countering a rising superpower like China, what keeps it from just fizzling out? I mean, what stops it from becoming just another irrelevant talking shop where diplomats take a photo, release a generic statement, and go home?
This raises an important question, perhaps the most important question regarding its longevity. And the answer lies entirely in the logic of geoeconomics. The binding glue of the I2U2 is not a shared enemy. It is the shared, desperate necessity of securing public goods, stabilizing highly volatile regional supply chains, and actively fostering economic multipolarity.
Fostering economic multipolarity. Let's translate that. Basically, it means making sure no single country, whether that's China or even the US, holds all the economic cards or monopolizes the tech supply chains in the region.
Exactly. The mutual reliance on capital, technology, and market scale is the unifying motive. It is a positive agenda building things, rather than a negative agenda stopping someone. However, this highly pragmatic, economy-first approach brings significant strategic dilemmas and challenges for India.
Because the region is still incredibly volatile.
Right. The Middle East remains a deeply divided, highly volatile region beset by active, ongoing conflicts. India's paramount diplomatic directive must be to avoid getting drawn into these regional security crises.
Yeah. The tightrope walk continues. And the most precarious part of that tightrope is the second major challenge, the Iran factor. India has deep historical and strategic ties with Iran. The decisions and economic alignments made within the I2U2 must not adversely impact or restrict India's vital bilateral outreach to Tehran.
This requires a highly sophisticated, almost delicate balancing strategy. India must utilize its enhanced economic position within this new West Asian Quad to build, rather than burn, bridges with Iran.
Right, like the Chabahar Port project.
Perfect example, the Chabahar port in Iran, which India is developing to bypass Pakistan and access Central Asian markets. India must ensure that its alignment with the U.S. and Israel in the I2U2 does not compromise its strategic connectivity projects in Iran.
That makes total sense.
Simultaneously, from an impartial macro geopolitical perspective, there is a fascinating symmetry here. Just as India uses its diplomatic agility to balance its ties between Iran and the I2U2 grouping, Israel should logically use its strong, established commercial ties with China to rein in any potentially adverse or destabilizing Chinese policies in the Middle East. It is a web of intersecting leverage.
This all culminates in the ultimate grand strategy concept, strategic autonomy. The strategic literature makes a highly pertinent, incredibly fascinating comparison here. Think about China's footprint in the Middle East. China successfully maintains strong, parallel, highly lucrative economic and diplomatic ties with both Iran and Israel simultaneously.
Right.
Beijing doesn't pick a side. It does business with everyone. By forming the I2U2, India is now demonstrating that it is shedding its historical ideological inhibitions to do exactly the same thing. India must ensure it is not bound into exclusive, restrictive relationships. It must vigorously maintain its parallel ties across all regional fault lines.
They want to be everywhere.
India wants to buy oil from the Arabs, buy drones from Israel, develop ports with Iran, and attract capital from the UAE all at the same time.
That is the very essence of multipolarity in action. Before we conclude, we must execute a quick active recall and intertopic linkage exercise.
Okay, listeners, get ready.
I want you to actively recall those 6 non-security areas of cooperation identified at the Sherpa level of the I2U2. We discussed how they interlock, like Israeli desalination and UAE capital. Take a brief moment to list them mentally.
Give it a second.
You should have identified food security, health, water, space, transportation, and energy. If your recall was incomplete, you need to ensure you understand that this grouping is built on these civilian economic foundations, not military pacts.
We are going to move into our rapid revision recap to close out this deep dive. Let's trace the massive cause-effect chain we have built over the course of this discussion. It begins with the cause the U.S. brokered Abraham Accords, which shattered decades of public diplomatic gridlock.
Yes. This directly leads to the effect, a new era of diplomatic pragmatism in the Middle East, where economic interests begin to supersede historical grievances.
Which results in institutionalization, the formal formation of the I2U2 grouping, combining the unique strengths of 4 distinct nations.
Which moves to application-targeted, massive economic and technological investments, like the J&K infrastructure proposals, combining Indian-scale, Israeli innovation, and Emirati capital.
And finally, it leads to future balancing, the ongoing vital necessity for India to maintain parallel ties with nations like Iran, ensuring strict strategic autonomy in a multipolar world.
Your final revision capsule involved locking down the administrative and strategic vocabulary required to articulate these concepts clearly. Whether you are writing a policy paper, an exam answer, or just analyzing global news, ensure you are comfortable utilizing the following terms: Indo-Abraham Accord, Sherpa-level interactions, integrated regional policy, diplomatic pragmatism, and the extended neighborhood.
We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, extrapolating directly from the necessity of parallel ties we just discussed. We've talked a lot about how India is navigating this incredibly complex web.
Right. Consider this geopolitical reality. If China can successfully maintain parallel economic ties with both Iran and Israel without immense blowback, and India is now aggressively shedding its historical inhibitions to do exactly the same while simultaneously partnering with the United States. What does this mean for the future of the region?
It's a huge question.
Could the deeply divided Middle East, a region long defined by proxy wars and rigid religious ideologies, actually become the ultimate testing ground for true pragmatic multipolarity? Are we currently witnessing a massive historical pivot where harsh economic imperatives, the necessity of tech integration, and brutal supply chain realities finally override decades of entrenched historical ideologies?
That is the strategic paradigm you need to evaluate. Can economics finally conquer history in West Asia? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Take these frameworks, review those 6 pillars, and keep an eye on how this geopolitical startup continues to evolve.